value of transparency requires us to explain the why. When you state that and you publish it, you list it as one of your ground rules, if you will. That's what standards really are, ground rules. When you list it as one of your ground rules, it pushes it back to the forefront of your mind. It keeps it there, and it allows you to hold one another accountable to those standards. So that opens up a whole new part of this conversation, which is the commitment part. We can write value-based standards, but if no one's committed to the mission, vision, and values, then no one's committed to the behavior standards either, in which case they'll get filed away just like everything else.
Welcome to Culture Change RX, the podcast for healthcare professionals that are committed to creating a thriving workplace culture, improving the experiences of employees and patients, and ultimately unlocking their organization's next level of potential. I'm Sue Tetzloff, your host and co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions. Join me and my insightful guests each week as we share actionable insights for navigating the crucial people side of the business of healthcare. Subscribe now for a weekly dose of Culture Change RX. Now let's dive into this week's conversation where culture change takes center stage. Thank you for pressing play on this episode of Culture Change RX. I am Sue Tetzloff, the co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions and the host of Culture Change RX. And with me today is Matt Streeter. He is the CFO at North Country Healthcare. And also for the last 6 months, he's been serving as the interim president of Weeks Medical Center, of an affiliate of North Country Healthcare in Lancaster, New Hampshire. So Matt is an example of two things in rural healthcare. One, we tend to tap certain people on the shoulder time and time again when they are making things happen in healthcare. And Matt is certainly one of those leaders in healthcare. I've known him for well over a decade in various roles in various organizations in rural healthcare. And he is a mover and a shaker, and he makes things happen. So not surprised that he was tapped on the shoulder to serve as the interim president in his organization. And also, he's an example of how in rural healthcare, we wear many hats and we can do them very effectively and very well. And so I welcome Matt back to the podcast. I say welcome back because he also did record an episode on the podcast. I'll link it in the show notes. It was on the CFO's role in cultural transformation. And he holds the record for having the episode with the most listens and downloads. Matt comes to our conversation today with so much experience in rural healthcare and in leadership and improvement and growth and transformation of healthcare organizations. So we could talk about so many different things. So when I asked Matt, where should we focus our conversation today? He brought up the topic of mission, vision, and values and creating them, updating them, the importance of bringing and keeping them alive. I love this topic. I know it's going to be a great conversation. And I thank you, Matt, for being here with us today. So let's dive right in. Maybe let's start with values. Let's start there with values.
It might be that the board of directors has a certain set of words that they want to be the values of the organization. Or maybe administration has a certain acronym that they want the values to spell. It needs to come more organically than that, in my opinion, because like culture, it is the sum of all of our people's values. Mm-hmm. So what do our people value? Why did they choose healthcare? Why did they choose nonprofit healthcare? Why did they choose nonprofit rural healthcare? Why did they choose nonprofit rural hospital-based healthcare? I mean, we can start slicing and dicing this a million different ways, but at the end of the day, it comes down to what do our people believe is important for moving our organization through its mission to its vision? And that really has to come from the people. If our people think integrity is important, then integrity is one of our values. If our people think transparency is important, then transparency is one of our values. I think it's really important to hear from our people But to this point, as people change, we also need to go back and verify. Do we still think integrity is a value? Do we still think transparency is a value? Now, this gets tricky, right? Because who's going to say we don't need integrity in healthcare?
Yeah.
No one's going to say that. We don't need compassion in healthcare. Well, yeah, we could run a list of every beatitude, every attribute word that there is in the English language, and every one of them is a candidate, I'm sure, for somebody's list of values. And there's no right or wrong. So then how do you decide? And in my opinion, it's by asking your people. It's by getting out there, talking to them. There's a lot of ways to do this. I've done it 2 or 3 different ways in my career, but I think about when we were back at Southwest Health and we were developing our value-based behavior standards. Now, there's a term we should probably talk about. Value-based behavior standards. That is an exciting concept.
It is exciting. And I can think back to, reaching back into your career at that point when you were there at Southwest Health. You actually had, again, wearing lots of hats. You were wearing the hat of being the executive sponsor for an employee-driven team, an employee experience team. And you were part of leading the organization's efforts to develop behavior standards. And, it's a story that's actually kind of continued to stay top of mind, even at Capstone Leadership Solutions, when we had worked with Southwest Health all those years ago. And this was happening. I mean, that was more than a decade ago. And your purple wall story, we refer to it as that, is something that resonates and continues to be told within our coaching team. And we share that story with other organizations that are embarking on this journey. So I think you should tell the purple wall story.
Love the story. This is how real leadership happens in life, right? Like you think it's always pretty, it's always refined, and it happens in a beautifully appointed office. And no, not always. Sometimes it's chaos. Sometimes you make do with what you have in the resources that you have and in the locations that you have. So this is kind of a funny story. When I was at Southwest Health, I had just purchased a home because I had relocated to the area right at the same time that we were launching our journey to excellence there. And our HR director, Holly, a very, very good friend and colleague of mine for many, many years now, was our initiative champion. And so the two of us were tag teaming the development of our values-based behavior standards. So the first thing we did, of course, was meet with all corners of the organization in a facilitated activity where we asked people what were their values, what was important to them, but then also what did the values mean to them. So when we said something like dignity, which was one of the values itself, it is today one of the values of Southwest Health. What does dignity mean? What does it mean? And so we would start to brainstorm that in each of these little sessions, sort of like focus groups. And we would put it on the wall. We put it on these Post-it pages, if you will, that we could stick up on the wall. Well, we did this over and over and over in every pocket of our organization until we had, 20 or 30 of these pages for each one of our values. Then we had to try to figure out, how do we compile this? And where in the world do we have the space to look at all of these pages at once? Well, as I mentioned, I had just moved to the area, and our house, we had not moved into our house yet, so it was vacant. So the entire living room was wide open space for us to use for this activity. Now, the purple wall comes in because the house had not been renovated or remodeled yet, and the living room wall was this very interesting rag roll purple from the late 90s. You all can picture this in your head, can't you? Well, the wall was coming down and getting painted anyway. We thought, what a great opportunity. We stuck all those pages up on every wall of my living room in my new house that I hadn't even moved into yet, and spent the day compiling everybody's thoughts into what later became the foundation for our value-based behavior standards. So the purple wall story lives on in infamy, I suppose.
It does. It does. And it should be a creative process. I think the color probably inspired people, and the setting probably inspired people to do great work. And I know, to your point, those behaviors, those values are still alive and well over 10 years later at Southwest Health. I love it when I go on their Facebook page and I see the the monthly recognition of their employees that are being recognized for living those values and living those behaviors. Um, I find that those social media posts get more likes, more comments, more shares than about anything that I see on social media in the healthcare realm. It's like their employees really delight in celebrating those behaviors and those people that live those behaviors.
They really do. And I remember when we, as the employer of choice team, obviously as the executive sponsor, my role was to break down barriers and make, the pathway forward for the team to be successful. I wasn't there to tell them what to do or to be a referee. It was to be a resource and support to them.
Mm-hmm.
The team was led by our HR director. By that time, we had some attrition. Holly had moved on and Erica had joined our team. And we had a wonderful employer of choice team that was leader led and staff driven. That's the motto, right? We all know the mantra, leader led, staff driven. And they did a great job. And what they did was they went out to all of the staff across the organization and they said, what's important to you from a recognition perspective? How do you want to be recognized for a job well done? And in fact, how do you want to be recognized when you go above and beyond? And of course, the conversation can be teed up differently. Not just how do you want to be recognized, but how would you like to recognize your peers? How would you like to recognize your boss? How would you like to whoever it might be? So after we had gathered all that data, we came up with basically what was an employee of the month, but we didn't call it that. We called it the Driven Award winner. And DRIVE was the acronym that we created from the values there. So the Driven Award naturally just connected back to the values. What's great about that is that the employee of the month, is no longer a popularity contest, right? This is not about who was the nicest to the staff or no, this was about our values. And people were nominated when they demonstrated that they lived out our values in a way that was impactful beyond the norm. So now what we had were employees nominating one another because they saw somebody really go above and beyond, really do something to live out our values. And let's connect it back. Really advance us toward the vision by living out our mission through our value-based behavior standards. That's really what this award was all about. I can't wait until we bring something like that to the organization I'm in now. And of course, we're just at the beginning of our journey, but this is going to be so exciting. And through my time at Southwest and other organizations, I've learned so much about how to do this. I've done it again since I've been here at North Country Health, a little bit different process I can share with you. But I think there's some tips that I've learned about how to do this that really makes creating value-based standards a lot easier. But it's really hearing from our people.
We've said it at Capstone for all of these years that behaviors matter most. It's like all the things that we can do to create, again, or that vision and that mission of being the very best, right, in the country. Or actually, I worked with an organization that was a specialty organization where they wanted to be the very best in the world in something, right? And so when you think about that, you think that there's so many things that are tactical and strategic that matter more than this. But we've done, exercise after exercise in organizations all over the country in healthcare. And when we have them vision being the very best, and what does that look like? And then we ask them how to get there. 80 to 90% of what they say that gets them there is all behavior based. So, greatness really is about great behaviors. And if we don't take the time to put in writing what we mean by that, and if it doesn't align with our mission, vision, and values, and we can't really connect to that, be part of that, then it isn't the tool that gets us to greatness. So we would love to hear your tips for either creating them and or bringing and keeping them alive.
I get so excited about this conversation because it changes how we do our work, it changes how we perceive our work as well. But let's dive into the how-to, right? So how do you develop value-based behavior standards, or let's just say value-based standards, because I'll introduce a new concept in a second here, but how do you do this? Well, first of all, let me introduce that other concept. I believe that not only should every organization have value-based behavior standards for everyone in it, I also believe that every leadership team should have value-based leadership standards. How are we going to lead this organization? And I think those evolve over time as well. The reason I bring up this distinction is that we in our journey here at North Country Healthcare have not gotten yet to the point of value-based behavior standards as a system. We'll get there. It's coming within this next probably 12 to 18 months, if I had to guess. And I'm really excited about when we do that work. But in the meantime, as I've been working with my team within finance, which is about 185 people, just to give people, a perspective of what we're talking about here. As I look at the finance division of our system, I recognized very early on that our leaders needed a true north. We needed some ground rules. And of course, what did I do? I went back to what I know, thanks to Capstone and others, which is go to your values. Well, luckily, we had just revamped our values, our mission, and our vision. So it was perfect timing. So here's what we did, and this is what I would suggest, and you tailor this to whatever level in the organization you're working with and however big or small your organization is, and of course, whatever the culture of your organization is. But this is how we did it. We looked at each one of our values, and then we looked up, we looked down, we looked in, and we looked out. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Let's say, for example, one of our values is reliability. That is kind of a tough one to really get, like, what does that mean? Reliability, right? Like we go to HRO, we think about the obvious low-hanging fruit, if you will, the no-brainers of reliability, but I think it can go even further. So here's how we went through the process. We started with, and everyone participated, what does reliability mean to you? We just started with a basic definition. Okay, that's easy enough. Reliability might mean dependable, might be somebody that always follows through, somebody we can rely on, those sorts of things usually come out. Then we said, let's look up. When you think about your relationship with your one-up, your direct supervisor or leader, what does reliability mean now? Both ways, from your leader and to your leader. Let's look down the org chart. What does it mean when we're thinking about your staff, your team, both to your staff and team and from your staff and team? Let's look outward. What does it look like to our patients? And then let's look inward. What does it look like to all of your peers? So that seems like a lot of work, but I'll be honest, when we went through this, the depth of meaning for each value became so much greater. And that allowed us to then go into the next step, which is, okay, now that we've defined what the value means, how are we going to demonstrate it? How are we going to live it out every single day? How are we going to prove that reliability is really important to us? And so we started brainstorming. What does it mean to be reliable? Knowing, again, looking up, down, in, and out, what does it mean to be reliable? And these are the sorts of things that the team came up with on their own. Now, remember, these are leadership standards. So this doesn't apply to everyone in the organization. But for us, it's really how our leaders decided they wanted to lead. Be results oriented, on time, and meet deadlines. That's one of them. Okay, that's pretty profound, but do we really need to state that? That seems like common sense. Respond to all emails in a timely manner. Acknowledge requests, even when still in progress. Be present and visible to our teams by showing up, rounding, and being involved. And I can go on and on and on, but for every one of our values, there's about 15 to 18, maybe 12 to 18 statements that say, these are the things that show that reliability is important to us. Or another way to say that is, our value of reliability requires us to be results oriented, on time, and meet deadlines, to respond to all emails in a timely manner. And then you just repeat, rinse and repeat, right? Next value, up, down, in, out. How are we going to do this? Next value, up, down, in, out. What does it look like? And we just did this over and over and over. And then we tweaked it. We eliminated duplication. We tried to make it less verbose. And then we created a one sheet front and back hard copy of our value-based leadership standards that every one of our leaders posted in their office as a daily reminder. How do we do our work? Now, the reality of it is we have not officially embarked on our journey yet. And when we do, we'll revisit this and it'll probably look a little bit different. It'll probably be more informed. We'll be more mature about it because we've done, at least some of us have done it once already. But that's the approach that I've sort of honed after doing this 3 times now. And I would really suggest that everybody else thinks about that. And maybe you're not on a journey right now to create value-based standards, but either way, Look at your organization's values and go through the exercise yourself. Go up, go down, go in, go out. Are you living out the values of your organization? It's a really interesting exercise and one I highly recommend.
That is brilliant, Matt. There's so much to unpack there. And certainly that is so usable. Somebody could just start, take that away, run with it in whatever scope, whether it's for their entire organization, whether it's for all employees, whether it's for leaders, whether it's for a subset of employees and leaders. We always say, make each one better than anyone before. Study adjust how we did it before to make it better than it was before. And that's such a great example that shows how your experience, you had success doing it other ways in the past, but you look and you go, how can we make this even better, easier, quicker, more impactful to get to what we want? That is absolutely brilliant. So yeah, what a great example of that. You mentioned it earlier that how could we not all agree that integrity is important? It's such common sense, or some of these things that are actual behaviors or actions like, oh, that's just common sense. But that's really where the magic is taking these common sense things and making them commonly and consistently practiced. And we do think it's just common sense, just like hallway hospitality, right? We think it's, we're in a service industry, we're compassionate. It's just common sense that we would be friendly in the hallways. But you walk into probably 90% or more of healthcare organizations around the country, and you're not going to find that in the hallways to the level of common sense consistency that really demonstrates the behavior. So you take that value and then you say, as demonstrated by what? What actions, what behaviors? And that's where the rubber meets the road. And then we got to get consistent with them. And we're talking humans here. And as humans, behavior change is hard. It's the hardest of all. It's the most important and it's the hardest of all. But it starts with having something in writing that guides us to what we're all aspiring to as far as this value as demonstrated by what. And so we know what it is.
Common sense isn't common anymore. I think we can all agree on it, right? I think about, things like explaining the why. At this point, if you haven't heard the term explain the why, you're maybe not reading or listening to enough leadership content. I've heard it so many times in my 30 plus years of being a leader. It's ingrained in my head, but yet what do I forget to do so often? Explain the why. Mm-hmm. When you take something like that, and for us, it appears within our value of transparency. Our value of transparency requires us to explain the why. When you state that and you publish it, you list it as one of your ground rules, if you will. That's what standards really are, ground rules. When you list it as one of your ground rules, it pushes it back to the forefront of your mind. It keeps it there, and it allows you to hold one another accountable to those standards. So that opens up a whole new part of this conversation, which is the commitment part. We can write value-based standards, but if no one's committed to the mission, vision, and values, then no one's committed to the behavior standards either, in which case they'll get filed away just like everything else and disappear, and everyone will forget. It's got to be something that people commit to. And I think there's a little bit of, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for. It's like ceremonialism, but that's not the quite
no, it truly is. It truly is. And there's evidence out there about starting and building a movement. And ceremony is part of one of the tactics. Symbolism and ceremony are two very important aspects of bringing and keeping something alive like mission, vision, value. I think that is the right word.
Well, I thank you for that. I learned that from you guys when we were at Southwest. We created the value-based behavior standards, and then we created an experience by which every member of our team could walk through the history of the organization, where we had been, where we were going, see that the journey had been laid out before us, and at the end of that experience, make their commitment to the ground rules, to the value-based behavior standards. And of course, that was another one of those exciting times. This is during the Purple Wall days, right? So we created this walk-through, almost museum-like experience. I remember red curtains and black and white photographs and special spotlighting. And it would just happen to be a vacant space in the hospital that was slated for renovation later in the year. So we converted it to this experience, if you will. And it
You
was,
are a great user of space.
yeah, I can take vacant space and turn it into anything. That's a gift that the CFOs have at this point. Yeah, it was at the same time. It was happening at the same time as that Wall Street. The commitment is really important. So when I learned that from you all at Southwest, I wanted to bring that here to North Country when I got here. So of course, after we developed our value-based leadership standards with my leadership team, the next step was the commitment. And so we did exactly that. We didn't do the experience. We didn't walk through the history necessarily. And I would encourage everyone to make this specific to you, make it important and meaningful to you and your organization. You know better than anybody what's important to you and your organization. But for us, I knew what was important to us and what we needed to do. So we created what we called a commitment card, front and back. And on the front side, it was the same on both sides. And on it had our logo, it had our 6 values: reliability, teamwork, compassion, transparency, integrity, and innovation. And beneath that, it had a spot where every leader could sign their name. And it said, as a leader of this organization in the continual pursuit of excellence, I am committed to living out the values of the organization by demonstrating the standards of leadership to the best of my abilities. And here's key, and to helping my peers do the same. Every one of our leaders, accepted and committed to the value-based leadership standards within the finance division, and all of them have this card with their signature on it posted next to their standards in their office. It's their reminder: I committed to this. I need to see this through to the end. It's fantastic. It brings the whole group together, but it also, as you noticed, it introduces another concept, which is we're in this together. Sometimes we fall down. We don't always have an A game kind of day. Some days are better than others. And every one of us trips up once in a while and fails to live out our value-based standards, whether they're behavior standards or leadership standards. That's where we owe it to one another to just say, hey, I think you'd want to know, I think you fell down. It's okay. What can I do to help you get back up? We need to help each other be the best that we can. And sometimes that means pointing out when we've fallen down. Now, there's right and wrong ways to do that, of course, but that could be a whole nother podcast someday, I suppose.
Yes. And, creating that feedback rich culture where you actually coined this term too, back in the days of Southwest as well, omnidirectional feedback. So it's not feedback just leader to employee, but it's, employee to employee, employee to physician, and leader to boss, whatever. So anyone could give anyone feedback because that's just part of keeping the standards alive. And we can all do that, and we all should do that. It's one of the tactics that helps us. It also reminds me too, when you mention about that commitment part and what starts to happen after that, like we are willing to call each other out and to recognize each other and to celebrate each other for these behaviors. But I remember a physician group, I was doing a focus group with a physician group about 6 months after a commitment event for new behavior standards. The providers also committed to those organization-wide value-based behavior standards. And when I was meeting with them, I just wanted to check in, like, what are you noticing in response to this? And I'll just never forget this one physician that said, I am just amazed at 2 things. One, how I catch myself. Like, nobody has to call me out. I'm calling myself out. Like, I'm catching myself. Before, this wasn't top of mind. This wasn't a priority. This wasn't something that my brain would go, hold it. You're going down the wrong path in your behavior. We don't behave like that around here anymore. Like, this is not acceptable. And I'm catching myself, right? But then he also said the other thing that he noticed was he never noticed before people talking about behaviors. And now it's a topic of conversation, almost like just daily. People are talking about behaviors. And that is a step on that path of bringing and keeping those high standards alive, for sure. Those 2 things, catching ourselves and just keeping it top of mind and talking about it and recognizing the importance of it.
The reason that people get excited when talking about behaviors is because, let's be real, it's the one thing we can control, our own behavior. Right? I mean, yeah, we could go into a whole conversation about,
How
knee
hard
jerk
that is.
and all of that. But the reality of it is that should be the one thing that we can't
Mm-hmm.
control the weather. We can't control which patients come through the door every day. We can't control motor vehicle accidents. We can't control pandemics. We all learned that the hard way.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality of it is, if every member of the team is controlling their own behaviors and you are all aligned in what those behaviors should be, I mean, come on, just thinking about that is
Mm-hmm.
impactful, right? If everybody is controlling their behavior under the same premises and heading in the same direction, that's got to be powerful versus the standard chaos that is just normal behavior in normal life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Truly one of the foundational pieces of cultural transformation for sure. I mean, behaviors do matter most, not just in organizational greatness overall with, improving and growing, because we know that the attractiveness, the magnetism of a lot of organizations is their culture. We've proven that to be true over and over again, is that you become a magnet for talent. People want to work here. People want to stay. People want to give discretionary effort. They want to recommend you as an employer to others. So your applicant pool goes up and your patients become more loyal. We have stories of physicians deciding to sign on at the small rural hospital just because of their culture. I mean, there's so much ROI on this.
So not only do you see the cultural impact, right? Again, what we just were talking about, when everyone is behaving within the guidelines, heading in the same direction, of course, it's going to have a positive impact on culture. But this is also a tool for leaders. Once they are completed, it can go both ways. It can be used as a tool to reward great behavior and to curb
Mm-hmm.
unwanted behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
So after you've developed the value-based behavior standards or the value-based leadership standards or whatever it is that you're working with your values to bring them to life, that's not the end of it. Yes, that's your ground rules for going forward, but it becomes a really useful tool. And here's how. Number one is when somebody is living out the values, it's an awesome opportunity to harvest a win and reinforce that behavior through recognition, reward, and celebration and appreciation. So it might be as simple as a thank you note, or it might be as simple as a high five in the hallway. Hey, thanks for taking care of blah, 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 blah. That was really a great way to live out our value of integrity, or whatever the case might be. So it can certainly be used as a way to harvest wins when people are living out those values. And of course, that reinforces further living out of the values. Now, I don't like to go negative, and none of us really do, but there are those cases sometimes when we need to use the standards as a tool to curb behavior. Look, I know you're really trying to do the right thing here, but the other day, I don't think you really lived out our value of innovation, and here's why. What can I do to help you next time? Because our value of innovation requires us to ask our team's peers and others for input, and you failed to do that, or whatever the case might be.
Mm-hmm.
It's a gentler conversation, I think, than if you come in and there's been, a series of bad behaviors, and now it's going to be punitive, and it's going to be you broke the rules violation. That's a different conversation than I know you committed to our standards, so I think you would want to know, here's where you maybe fell down. What can I do to help you get back up and be better? So it's a tool that you certainly can put in your toolbox and help you both reward and curb behaviors as a leader going forward.
It's very hard to do that as a leader without these standards in writing and without, to your point, having that commitment in place as well. So having the standards, having the commitment, that opens up the door to these conversations landing differently and being expected more when we have these standards. I remember in my organization, when I was a new leader, new in senior leadership, and I was, in the nursing division, we didn't have all this place, and yet we hadn't begun our transformation. But I was happy to have high standards and in what my expectations were for quality of care, for quality of leadership, all of that. But, I remember people saying, Sue, your standards are too high. And it's like, the only reason they said that is because we hadn't all agreed on those high standards and we hadn't all committed to them. And so it made it even harder for me to try to bring and keep those high standards alive because they were perceived as just mine. And so there really wasn't that existing buy-in and commitment and process to make them our standards versus Sue's standard. So I was kind of the crazy one.
I think that this has application even for folks who maybe aren't on a journey or aren't in a position of leadership in a healthcare organization. Let's just say you're just somebody out there who happened upon this podcast and you're listening to two friends contemplate the world that they live in. How can this apply to you? Create your personal values. What's important to you? And then create your standards. Look up, look down, look in, look out. Look at your spouse, your family, your neighbors, your friends, your community, your employer, your church, whatever it is. How are you going to live your life? What are the ground rules for you personally based on your personal values? And I used to think Simon Sinek and all these other authors are always talking about these things. I'm like, I don't have time to sit down and write a strategic plan for my life. Are you kidding? I have to write one for work. But I'll tell you, when you start to think about what's important to you and approach your own life the same way that we do the work that we do, it can really be changing. It can really be impactful. And I would suggest that if you're out there wondering what you can do today, you at least have the power to create your own personal values and then therefore your own personal standards, and maybe bring that to work with you and think about how you might be able to apply that.
It might even be your own mission, vision, and values. Why do I exist? What's my vision for my future? And what values are going to get me there?
That's a great point, Sue. A lot of people across the country are hurting right now. We're in a very difficult time, I think, in our history. And this might be the best advice we can give folks is go back to your true north. What is your mission, vision, and values? Because you may find real solace and contentment once you realize what you're really all about.
Yeah, start with yourself. Let it begin with me.
Correct. Yeah.
Oh, this has been delightful. I knew it would be, Matt. So as we wrap up this conversation today, you have packed it with great tools, tactics, wisdom, real actionable items. But is there anything that wraps up this conversation today that you didn't want to leave out?
Absolutely. And this is advice I wish I would have given myself a long, long time ago. Don't try to get it perfect or you'll never start. Just do it. Just start. You can always go back and tweak it, revamp, 2.0, the next generation, whatever you want to do. It can change over and over and over. But don't be afraid to try because you're afraid you're not going to get it right. You're going to be upset if you don't try. If you at least try, do something, try it again later. I really think that's the key. So don't try to be perfect. Just try to get going, and then you can always come back and revisit it.
That is just wonderful advice. It's perfect advice. Don't try to be perfect. Thank you, Matt.
Well, thank you so much, Sue. Many hellos to everybody out there. Lots of friends and colleagues, and to everybody I don't know yet. You're listening to the right stuff, which is great. So thanks so much for having me, Sue.
Yeah, you're welcome, Matt. Bye now.
Thanks for tuning in to Culture Change RX. If you found value in today's episode and you are a believer in fostering change in healthcare, join us in making a difference. Follow, rate, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. Share it with colleagues and your network. Together, we can make a lasting impact. Until next week, keep inspiring positive change.